revisionism has consequences. It especially has consequences when you keep trying to play games with the British. I don't know what to say. I really wish I could have found a way to have a better relationship with the British. I really do. But everything they do has a way of getting twisted back as somehow completely detestable. See, I don't know. I can't trust that this article has any authenticity, even though it's by Mr. Friedland. I mean, he's reputed as a fine quality journalist. The problem is there's information in here, and in a particular style that may be his own. It is presented in a way that at least twice I know of being factually incorrect. Incredibly incorrect, first of all. This impunity. This is not true. It has been recounted, including by theater commanders in Europe, that after VE Day and after the Nazis began surrendering, it was a massive confrontation for the Allied forces, including, but especially, the Americans. What to do with the prisoners of war? What to do with the former soldiers? There were so many of them. It was logistically, functionally impossible to accord them consideration of prisoners of war in the manner that was required under international law. To give them trials, to feed them, to build facilities. You really, really expect this revisionism to be able to hold up? There were no punishments. There were no court martials in the moment. I mean, there's another article somewhere. AP says that there was negotiations, or rather attempts to create propaganda around signing of certain treaties. But my understanding is that among many others, Eisenhower personally had to deal with what to do with them. There were millions of them. Millions of Nazis. They'd been mobilized. The previous political moment and movement in Germany that had been organizing people for their rights, including against the exploitation of capitalism and its emissaries, including those in collusion with the British and the Americans, by the way, had already been exterminated. They didn't want to talk about them, their contributions, who they were, including that they did not initially, some of them at least, support a war effort. They wanted a general strike. Well, when the general strike didn't come, well, at what point do you decide, hey, I like this. I want to be a part of this bureaucracy. Maybe I can get some leverage for myself personally. There's nothing wrong with having pride in your appearance, your cultural standing. Maybe I'll get some PPE. I'll have a mandate to demonstrate my compliance with the system and the state by wearing the armband. I'm sorry, the face mask. Now there's millions of us, right? Millions. Entire country. Anybody that didn't automatically assimilate, it didn't get absorbed and swept up, become a part of it, find a way to see themselves as heroic, standing up for the national cause, manifest destiny of a specific sort, expanding into other countries, implementing the regime, compelling them to assimilate. Is this true? Do they actually have a monument in Belarus based upon the complete annihilation of a village? Not just a village, apparently there are many villages. So you want me to believe in this version, and nobody ever talked about these other versions. Is it true that they burned people to death, that they would lock them in barns and burn them to death? And not only that, they would raise a village and then they would leave and then they would come back and raise it later? Is it true that 2 million people in Belarus were killed? during the occupation. Is this true? I mean, because I don't know if this is true, that there was impunity, that of the results of the Second World War, only 300 Nazis ended up going to prison. Is this true? Only 300 Nazis total went to prison. There were the tokens, I suppose you could say, certain exemplars from the Nuremberg trials. It was supposed to mean something, but did only 300 go to jail? 13.2 million men. This is what they want to say. Okay. Well, how about this one? When they're talking about this specific here. This is very specific. He says this. With access to the military intelligence and transport and with the right to travel freely across post-war Europe, quote, they were extremely efficient in tracking people down and conducting extrajudicial executions, end quote, he says. If little is known about them, that's because the men of the brigades were impeccably discreet, says the person in this article. Quote, they kept their mouths shut and took their secrets to their graves, end quote. That's not true. I saw a documentary that was made with some of these veterans. They discussed the entirety of their relationship, how the brigade got started, the ordeals they had to endure, what their priorities were during and after the war. See, they delayed allowing for the brigade to be activated and called up. They kept hemming and hawing, making some excuse. Until right at the end of the war. And what did they end up having to do? Mostly refugee resettlement. They didn't take their secrets to the grave. These were stories that they needed for people to know, including what they did when they went back and how they went back. And that's why I'm actually particularly offended. Because you talk about how Nazis assimilated into the culture by impersonating somebody's identity, or they found people assimilating into the culture, would pretend to be the Nazi in order to get them to execute. That's not the truth. You've completely slandered the actual history. That one paragraph with the other paragraph makes the entire rest of the article a complete slander. Because your exegesis is completely desecrated the first person testimonial of the people who actually did it while they were still alive. It's a lot easier now to let them backdate the stock so you can revisionist the story and try to claim some other metric scheme. It's completely slander. That's not what actually happened. That's not the way they told their own history. So how can I believe anything else you put in there? That's not what happened. You got the wrong people doing the wrong things for the wrong reason. And when you do that, you make it very dangerous. Because we are living in a time right now where there are literally millions of people that expect to be acknowledged as what? Heroes? It has been allowed for the entire economy, including the entire political economy, to be collapsed into a massive hallucination. That wholesale slaughter of people can just be covered up for some higher purpose. What are we supposed to do with all the Nazis now? You've murdered. We've seen murders of all kinds of other people. See, they played a nice trick. When first there were a couple doctors that went down. There were some people in some hospitals that went down. Some admin went down. As if, pay your taxes up front. Who went down after that? Who's been dying of COVID-19 since then? These gargantuan numbers. You just throw it at us until we become normalized. We're expected to allow the entire rest of what's left of our future to be subsumed into some delusion that essential services, which also, includes those self-medication possibilities in order to deal with all the trauma and stress, that the Nazis are our heroes. And if you don't call the Nazis your heroes, then you will just be put in your own private prison. They will just lock you away for how long? The rest of your life while you have it? What are we going to do with all the Nazis? You've already killed a lot of people that weren't Nazis. And what was happening is they were killed so that the people who are Nazis could get their retirements either set up or paid out. You want us to just turn a blind eye and assimilate into accepting Nazis as heroes because they deserve their workers' rights. But you completely annihilated and massacred the actual movement for workers' rights. And you won't let us have jobs so we can actually even be a part of a workers' movement unless we agree to conspire with and as a Nazi. That's what we're dealing with. And the ironic thing is, where's the army? Where's the military? Are you guys too busy trying to get your advances from the bankers? The central bankers? Are you just too busy because you've already hooked up your kickbacks? You were like Nazi Prime, right? And so you already hooked your deals up. And you already said, you know what? We're not going to demand market rate. We'll take the discount market. You just, what? They have no obligation to do anything about the Nazis? My understanding from what the old timers said was that among the things they did was not balance them on the hood of a car so that they could be left hanging in what could masquerade as a suicide, so that some years later, somebody that made fetish porn out of the SS could flip bonds to further whatever was supposed to cover up for modern Nazis. But rather, that what would happen is they would drive the cars through the center of the street with the bodies of the Nazis tied to the back of the car so that people understood. That people knew you were not going to get away with it. That's a lot different. It's a lot different way to understand what the response was and what the intent was behind the response. You want to make it look like murdering people involved with investigating and prosecuting organized crime in the modern era is somehow equivalent to a ritual hanging to be misrepresented as suicide. Let me ask you a question. What psychological impact did you think it was going to have on people that had en masse already gotten away with being Nazis that were just trying to lay low if they thought that the people that had been called out had just committed suicide? Man, man, your backdated stock is even fucking stupider than you planned for. Were you just not expecting it to go here? You completely slandered them. That is completely inaccurate.